Hey guys, I have a question for you. How do you spread abundance? This year, Joe and I are spreading even more abundance by giving out insights on money, wealth strategies, and resources in our current newsletter, Creating Abundance in 52 Weeks, that we want to share with you for free. So sign up right now as you're listening to this episode on our website at www.abundantculture.co. That's .co/newsletter. www.abundantculture.co/newsletter. Don't let delay get in the way of your abundant year. Now, back to the episode. Welcome back to Abundant Culture Podcast,
where we dissect the mindsets and tactics of the true beasts of business.
People like Gary Vee, Grant Cardone, and Warren Buffett.
All to create a blueprint to experience life more abundantly. Hey everybody, it's Joe. Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast. We're so glad to have you back again this week. Today, we're speaking with an industry disruptor, part technologist, part economist, and all innovator. He revolutionized the motor vehicle industry with the nation's first electronic title system for financial institutions, which was later sold for $106 million. His healthcare venture, benefitsCONNECT, innovated healthcare benefits administration and resulted in a highly successful acquisition. His new book is How to Launch Your Side Hustle, Start and Scale a Business with Minimal Capital. We're going to learn about exits and so much more. So get ready to listen to and learn from our good friend, Troy Underwood.
Hi, Troy, and thank you again for coming on to the Abundant Culture Podcast. We are super excited to have you today because your background is impeccable. So before we get into all of the business and entrepreneurial side of things, we have to ask you, what is that backstory? How did you get into business, and why did you get into business?
Into business, I think about that and I go, it was just a natural evolutionary process. I started doing entrepreneurial business stuff in elementary school. I would run a business selling, I remember Cheerful House greeting cards. And then I'd do seeds and door-to-door sales, magazines. I could just always do it. It just seemed like normal. You run your inventory, you do this, you take your orders, you fulfill your orders. So it seemed very natural all through high school, college, etc. So I look at my background there, and my grandfather was self-employed. He was a construction worker, contractor, cabinet maker. My dad's self-employed chiropractor. So for me to do something self-employed seemed very natural. And I didn't mind having a quote-unquote real job, a W-2, 8-to-5 job. But when I looked at everything that I could do in terms of my goals, aspirations, I just gradually and always leaned towards basically running my own show. I like to be able to, and it wasn't just about the money. I like to be able to plan my own vision and my own future. And it's not that I can't take orders from other people. I don't even really like giving orders. I like the team approach, but it just seemed so perfect for me to go off and do my own thing. Matter of fact, I don't know if I would go out and get a real job right now. I would run something else kind of on my own.
So you expressed to us before that there is some type of a difference between entrepreneurs and business owners. And this is something that I was extremely curious about because previously, when I was a little bit younger, I always kind of thought that they were the same thing. But then I see people who they're clearly entrepreneurs and there's people that are clearly business owners, but it's like a feeling that you get. And it's really hard for me to explain or articulate that difference. So I was wondering if you could shed a little bit of light on that for us.
You bet. I start the book out with the differences really between entrepreneur and a business owner. A business owner, that can be somebody who just buys a franchise. They're going to follow someone else's directions. They're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3. They're going to take a risk in the sense that they took a financial risk. Maybe they took out a loan or borrowed some money for the investment to buy the franchise, but they're not doing anything innovative, creative, anything different. They're actually following the franchise rules, which is most of the beauty of a franchise.
Yeah.
The other side of it, to be an entrepreneur, and I actually differentiate, there's a lot of different kinds of entrepreneurs too. It's not like just, okay, are you an entrepreneur? So in the book, I even talk about necessity entrepreneur. And I look at that and say, there's a big difference between certain types of risk takers, entrepreneurs, and others. So if you're like Howard Hughes, for example, a great guy, there's nothing disparaging about any of the comments, but he always had daddy's money to fall back on. He could risk anything, and a great risk taker. I mean, he'd fly a plane as a risk taker. But if he failed financially, he'd just take more money. So you can do that. It changes everything about what you're doing. When you can't fail, you have to be a lot different. I won't even necessarily say smarter, but certainly you're going to have to use a lot of different, cheaper, if you will, cost-effective, smart, if you want to go from that perspective, techniques to start and launch your business. So differentiating that business owner from an entrepreneur, from a necessity entrepreneur, are three very different people, different mindsets too. Innovators and inventors may be very different. So when you invent something, you may not be able to apply that invention to actually functionally innovate, put that into motion.
Absolutely. And with this book, tell our audience the name of the book and also give us some insight to what made you actually want to create this book, because I'm always interested in those types of stories.
So there's the book, How to Launch Your Side Hustle. What made me want to do it, I was actually sitting on an airplane a few years ago, and I was just chatting with a passenger next to me, and she said, Troy, that's an interesting story. You should write a book. So I immediately grabbed my iPhone and started writing. So I will make, and I think I can justify this, we'll make the assertion that this is the most interesting book of the 21st century.
Wow.
I wrote it with my thumb. Well, sometimes I would use two thumbs. I wrote it in Apple Notes. I wrote on my iPhone. I wrote on the beach. I wrote in bed. I wrote at the park. I wrote on an airplane. But I didn't just sit down in front of a computer and just pull up Word and start typing. So I produced the raw version just as a brain dump. It's kind of how I work. And then I'll give it to someone else. So my daughter, Ashley, in this case, I gave it to her and she's like, Dad, you got a lot of spell check problems here, because Apple Notes doesn't have spell check. There's no grammar correction. There's you ended a sentence with a preposition with. And I said, well, honey, that's why I'm asking you to fix all that. English majors are great. Go fix it all. So she did. It ended up being great. I mean, if you looked at the raw version that I wrote with my thumbs versus the final version, it's very different. So, but I think, and I didn't think about it until after I did it, that wait a second, that's me. No excuses. Some say, well, I can't write a book because I don't have a typewriter. I can't write a book because I don't have a computer. And I'm like, do you have a pen? Do you have paper? Do you have an iPhone? Whatever you have, wherever you are, can you do it? So I just wrote it with my thumb. And it's fascinating. I remember one night, and I'll just write down ideas, and then I'll fill it in. Write ideas, fill it in. Write ideas, fill it in. And then I'll take this coal and try to turn it into a diamond later. But I don't necessarily have to have everything perfect. I use very poor sentence structure. It's just trying to get ideas down. And then I'll let somebody else read it and say, okay, I know what I'm talking about. But if you read it, do you know what I'm talking about? And if the answer is no, then we'll rewrite it. So we did a lot of different revisions. I originally called it The Necessity Entrepreneur. And I really had no expectation. I mean, not that I didn't have an interest in writing a book, but I had no real plans to write a book until this passenger said, hey, Troy, you should write a book. Okay. I mean, I just decided it within 2 seconds of her saying it, pulled up my iPhone, and it wasn't to shut her up. Hey, you look for the next hour, I'm going to be writing. It was it just flowed. And I remember one night, I went to bed maybe 10 o'clock. I woke up at 11 and I had an idea. It's like, I've got something to say. I pulled out my iPad, which is great because now I've got two thumbs, and I just started writing. I just kept writing 11, midnight, 1, 2, 3. I never stopped. About 7:30, I got up and went on a bike ride. I came back a couple hours later, and I kept writing and writing. I didn't stop till 10 p.m. If I didn't have to eat or go to the bathroom or go on a bike ride, I would never have stopped. And then, so sometimes you just, days it's just flowing, and other days it's like, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
You force a couple ideas down and see if it goes anywhere, and if it doesn't, I don't know, you just wait until you get something. But I'm not also, and I hate to say this because obviously it's not true, but I'm not a professional writer. You know, in other words, if somebody said, Troy, you need to have this done by Thursday. Well, what if I'm not inspired between now and Thursday? So, you know, I was a software developer, so we had deadlines, but some days are better than others. So the original manuscript came out, and I actually had no expectations. I thought I'd self-publish it. I didn't really think a publisher would pick it up, but I was going to try anyway. So I submitted it to a publisher. A couple of them, one came back and said, no, thank you. And one came back and said, yes, but we want to change the title. What do you want to change it to? How to launch your side hustles. Start and scale a business with minimal capital. I said, okay, well, that's what I did. So they liked that. They came up with the book cover and the title, and they've been great as far as that goes. But I was really shocked to actually have a publisher pick it up instead of just self-publishing. And I figured I'd have 12 friends buy a copy, and then I would give 10 friends, you know, give my family a copy. But the publishers is very different in the sense that I don't actually get free copies of the book. So if all my friends that want one, I say, well, yeah, go to Amazon, go to Target, go buy it. I don't have that many copies of the book. My daughter wanted it the other day, and I'm like, well, I don't have just 10 copies sitting around. They all went out. You guys probably got a copy. The publicist probably sent you one. You know, fascinating. I love the whole process. And I've been asked too, are you going to write another book? Maybe. One of the reviews came in and says, you have so much material here, you could actually break this down and write another book. I don't know. If I feel inspired to do it, I'll go do it. Otherwise, I'll just enjoy this one.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So the title of the book, you mentioned starting a business with minimal capital. So how does someone do that exactly?
Well, there's a lot of ways to do that. And my analogy in small business like this, entrepreneurial small business like this, was very different than if you're working for a giant company. You can't be all, hey, let's figure it out as we go. If you're working for a giant company, they have policies, they have procedures, they have structure. So differentiate that from where we are, starting a business from ground zero and seeing if you can scale it. So very different than anything else. So there's nothing wrong with working for a giant company like IBM. I worked for IBM, fantastic people, fantastic company. But with minimal capital, you have to be very smart about everything you do. You can't waste any money. A lot of failed businesses, they'll blame, and I'm really not into the blame game. You know, no excuses, don't blame anyone else, just take responsibility and make it happen. And failure is not an option. So, you know, 433,000 new businesses start every year in America, and almost all of those fail. You know, 90+% of them are gone within a few years. So how can you run it so that you're scaling it? And you got to start out by getting a little bit of money that you can get. Wherever you can get that, that could be, you know, from the seat cushions. You could talk to your friends, fools, and family that'll actually loan you some money. You got to be careful on that too, because you could really destroy some familial relationships and friends if you lose all their money. They kick in a bunch of money to you and you lose it. You've now got a problem. Not everybody's so forgiving to say, oh, sure, I had $80,000 I didn't need, but hey, I'm glad you wasted it for me. There's a lot of other techniques. I used real estate a lot. I didn't have a giant plan. I didn't write out, here's my 5-year plan. I used kind of what I tell my employees. Okay, we're going to figure this out. I'm going to give you some string and some cloth, and I'm going to push you out of the plane, and you'd better build a parachute, or you're going to land really hard. So sometimes it's figured out while you go. Again, that doesn't really work if you're at IBM. But credit cards, I'll really caution you. You can use some. I was a master at credit cards. Half a dozen or a dozen or 2 dozen credit cards. And you have to be really careful because if you transfer an amount from this card to this card, you can get 6 months, 0% interest. Ah, great, I can do that. But don't go 6 months in one day because all of that accumulated interest will hit you. So you've got to be very careful juggling like that. And what I didn't want to do, this is only personal. I'm not, everyone has to do what's best for them. I didn't want to borrow money from my parents. It's just, they would have, they always offered, no thing, I got this. That's what one day, and I was a master juggler. It's like, okay, if I pay payroll on Tuesday and they pay on Monday, but I can't get that till Wednesday. I mean, during the first few years, that's what I was living the whole time. And one day, I've always made payroll. I don't ever bounce a check. But sometimes I'll hold it until it has to go out, until another payment comes in first. So my dad said, hey, son, I've got some money if you want it. No, I got this. And then I was like, no, I don't. Okay, so he had some money and I borrowed it and made payroll. And a few days later, a client or two paid and I paid him back. But I didn't really want to do that. You can go out and get small business loans. Small business loans are a good way to do that. They're going to ask about your credit worthiness. So if you go to a bank or an SBA, there is some money out there. You can, and I'd recommend it, look for grants, like you in college, look for scholarships. There is some grant money out there depending on what you're doing. Go get a grant. So an SBA or small business loan can be helpful, but make sure you actually need it before you go borrow it. Don't waste it. Don't think, oh my God, because sometimes, and you see it happen in professional sports people all the time. These kids come out of college with nothing and all of a sudden they have millions and they just waste it.
Yeah.
Do that. If you had nothing and now all of a sudden you got a $50,000 or $100,000 SBA loan or whatever you got, don't think you're rich. That's the philosophy. Never think you're rich. Always kind of pretend you're, even if you are, which is a tough description because who knows what rich is. I know a lot of people that have tens of millions of dollars that are as frugal as you can imagine. So be frugal in that, but then there's certain things you have to spend money on. You want your image to look good. You want your brand to look good. Then you're going up, but don't spend too much on this graphic design and marketing. So it's just all this constant balancing of don't go far, but don't go too far. Don't be too cheap. Be cheap, but not too cheap. Pay your employees, but not too much. I mean, there's a whole balance in that whole business startup.
Absolutely. So walk us through, you've already been a wealth of information. Walk us through some of the startups that you are a part of and I guess the experiences that you kind of gleaned from those, because I don't think we touched on a lot of the businesses that you had and exited as well.
Sure. Well, I had a few, but I'll focus on just two that successful. You got to look at it and say the creativity, like I mentioned, I financed a whole bunch of it with real estate. And real estate, you can buy nothing down over the phone, be creative on how you do that. And then you can take out a second on that and put that into this. So when I started that, I had a company called FDI. So financial data information was what it originally was. And we did banking information, banking rates and mortgage market share research and what have you. And then I moved over to consumer lending, so automobiles. And we looked at the way that motor vehicle titles were handled. At the time I was in California, but we rolled it out eventually in other states. And as a computer scientist in the 80s, it's really kind of a fascinating time because for me, I have been using the internet on a daily basis since 1982. When I was approaching businesses in the late 80s, even in Silicon Valley, this is high-tech capital of the world, some people thought it was just voodoo magic. It's like, no, really, someday Al Gore is going to invent this thing, but in the meantime, you guys should be using it. And it was really an exciting time because of everything that we could do business-wise. But you look at a process differently. I did everything on a computer. In high school, I wrote my term papers on a computer. But that was very, very, very unusual. I mean, I was probably the first person that graduated UC Davis to take an undergraduate and a lower division and an upper division English class on a Macintosh.
Wow.
So I was right at the very beginning of that kind of a microcomputer, the first person to graduate high school that owned my own computer from Wairika High School. And that was always normal for me. So when I went into banking for consumer lending and looked at motor vehicle titles, there's nothing particularly sexy about motor vehicle titles.
Yeah.
As I described it, it's the rear end of the horse. You know, loan origination, that's interesting. There's commercials on TV, you know, get your car loan here. But who cares about the title? Well, some of these large lien holders have millions and millions of these paper documents that have to be tracked and accounted for. So I turned the whole thing electronic. Why do you need paper? And this seems such a logical question for us to ask now. We don't even have to ask the question now because it's so common sense. You don't need paper, do it electronically. So, but at the time, I really had to convince some people. I remember talking to Wells Fargo Bank and said, hey, you should use this new electronic title system. And they said, no, Troy, we have 12 people and we can handle titles more efficiently than you can. And I said, I can do everything they do while playing golf. And I never make a mistake. I'll never lose a title. Everything was automated. Eventually they joined on board, but for a while they were just, I mean, not just Wells Fargo, there were several other institutions that just thought, no, we're so much better than anything you can conceive of. So it was a very, very, very big change in how financial institutions approached the servicing side of an automobile loan or lease portfolio. So it's that radical change. So if you're going out there to create something new and different, you have to be kind of careful on how you present it to people. And to sell nothing is a strange concept. So they had stuff, they had people, they had filing cabinets. And I'm coming to them saying, here, use my software, push a button. You don't need those people. You don't need the filing cabinets. You don't need the postage. You don't need the envelopes. You don't need to do anything. This process is automated. All you need to worry about are the exceptions. So maybe the car is stolen, or maybe there's no registration. You got a title that doesn't belong to you, but it's those exceptions, which are a small percentage. So I went to the largest bank in the state of Florida, and they laid off probably 99% of their workforce that had been handling paper titles.
Wow.
Replaced it with a few computers and a few people that knew what they were doing, and that was it. Because you don't need, it's like if you worked in the mail room delivering memos, you know, back in the 60s or 70s, and you had a tall building, you had to deliver 1,000 memos a day. And now we just push a button. Those people aren't needed anymore. Right. So convincing people that this really is exceptional. Now it's normal. And nobody should be doing motor vehicle titles that aren't electronic. It's just right. Not to. So that was one business, and we eventually added more. I tried to add a lot of different things to that based around the motor vehicle titles. And I didn't necessarily, so for example, when you do an automobile loan or lease portfolio, you also need your payment. Banks get payments automated pretty well, but you also need insurance verification. I thought, and I still think it's true, but no one's ever done it. I think if you got the forced place insurance, that you could give the title administration away for free just to have that opportunity. But that's, forced place sounds really horrible because it is. It's when people tell the lien holder, I'll have insurance on it, and then they don't go get insurance. Well, the lien holder is going to force insurance on that car. That's what you signed up for when you made the transaction. So those are financed. And actually, if you look through a lot of states, California is certainly one of them, most of the car transactions, the title was processed by my software. I'm still to this day. So I have processed more motor vehicle titles than all other people in the nation combined, just because it's all automated. I mean, you just every week you're processing another million titles. So it was really kind of cool. For a while, I actually snuck my initials on every title, and I'd tell someone, go look at that title. My initials are right there. So you'd see TU on every title. I was the largest DMV field office. So that was kind of fun.
That's awesome.
That is
The
awesome.
next one, I did the same idea in the sense that it was automated. Take a business process, automate it, remove the manual labor, and do everything electronic. Had to do with health insurance benefits administration, so eligibility, enrollment. We did some of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, compliance reporting. So we actually developed the first compliance reporting under Obamacare and tied that into what we deliver as eligibility and enrollment. So we had in the HR world. So we looked at it and said, okay, at the time, most people, you'd sign up for your medical, dental, vision, cancer, life, disability, and you'd get 6 or 7 or 8 different applications that you had to fill out the same information 6 or 7 or 8 times. And I'm going, what a giant waste. Put it all into a computer and push a button. So eventually that's what we did. So it was one of the earlier systems for benefits and administration. And then we added the ACA compliance reporting to it later on. And that was fascinating. And it got me into what I'm actually focused on now, because we did the health insurance. So we were not involved as a practitioner. We're not a doctor, we're not a hospital, we're not even an insurance company or an employer, but we're facilitating all those transactions. So indirectly, we're involved in healthcare, health insurance. And I'm a licensed health insurance agent. So, but I'm a software developer. So what I do is not really sell insurance to these groups. I work with other health insurance brokers, but in some cases we would actually be the broker of record. So I looked at health insurance, and it's probably number one topic, not right now, it's probably COVID-19, but the topic over the last few years has been health insurance. Obamacare is talked about, very significant politically, still is. And I looked at it and said, well, health insurance is expensive because healthcare is expensive. And why is healthcare expensive? Healthcare is expensive because we don't eat right. So I was going to go out and study that and figure out exactly why and write a whole mathematical, economic formula on it. But that's the formula. Healthcare is expensive. Health insurance is expensive. But if we ate right, it wouldn't be, because we'd be healthy as a nation. So that's been what I focused on recently, which is indirectly tied to what I used to do in the health insurance benefits administration.
That's awesome.
That is.
And I really like your thought process for a lot of these companies that you run, because you create almost these super simple ideas that seem common sense now, but wasn't common sense back then. Mm-hmm. And you just say, oh, instead of having all this manual labor, put in the system, press a button. And you did that with 2 companies.
Yes, but it's a button.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Like, and I think
I've been called lazy for doing that. I'm like, lazy? That's just smart.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's very important that we think of things in that streamlined way, because kind of like you said, a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily have a lot of capital backing them. And the more time and labor you spend doing, this menial process, the quicker you're actually burning through your cash. So I think it totally aligns with what you were talking about in your book, which is really trying to launch this business and scale it with minimal capital and using automation and these very simple processes to do so. Mm-hmm. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's very important that we keep in mind that the most important thing is that we produce a result for the marketplace, not that we work our faces off and, barely make any money for it. I think there's a 80% rule that you had in your book that talked about team building and who should be on your team. Can you talk about that process a little bit more? Because it seems like you've had a number of employees and you build successful businesses. And I think that team aspect is very important in that.
That's very true. When you start, and let's say we're going to start at the very beginning, you are the only employee. So almost by definition, you know everything. You're the CEO, the sales rep, the developer, the operations guy, the janitor, you're everything. And then you start growing. Now you can also use vendors to make sure that any expertise you don't have, a contractor or vendor can take care of that and do it for you. But as you start to grow, and that's what really is significant about, how I described it in this book, to grow that, your first few hires are really critical. And I have to say, a little bit of it is more art than science, but you want to get a hire that follows your culture. And at that point, the company culture is you. It is your culture. When I talk in the book, there's a couple of places. One, the 80%, and there's nothing scientific about that number. We hear about, 80% of all your problems are caused by 20% of your people, or, things like that.
Yeah.
As you start to hire, you'll probably find that the new hire, that especially in the beginning, the first few weeks, first few months, can't do it as well as you can. So what you need to do is make sure they're trained, make sure they have all their documentation, and then let them do it. Get out of the way, even if they're only 80% as good as you would have done it. So that's kind of what I said there.
Oh, okay.
Eventually the inverse becomes true, and they should be, I said 120, but even much more significantly better than you would. So after a while, and it was a transition, and it was kind of odd, I'm kind of a Renaissance man, and you kind of have to be when you're starting your own company, because you're doing everything. You are marketing, you are sales, you are operations, you are it. Yeah. And then you start hiring a few people. At first, you can probably do most things better than your new hires. At one point in your company, you are better than anybody else in there. Maybe you only have 3 or 4 employees, but hopefully after some time, they will be better than you. And then eventually, and it's kind of bizarre to go, wow, everybody that's in a key position can do it better than I can. And you want that. Narcissism, egotism aside, you want that. If you're going to be running the business, you want to hire people. You want to hire art graphics designers. I've never seen anybody that could do all of it well. You can't be a graphic designer and a CPA and a software. Even if you had all the time, you just don't have that mindset.
Yeah.
Graphic designers are horribly notorious for not spelling very well.
Yeah.
It's just like, how can you not spell? So you need to make sure that you know your graphics designers are going to do that. And you need to have the rest of the marketing department always proofread their work. Never send out, myself, I never sent out an important email without having somebody else read it. Just make sure I didn't use a double infinitive or something. I don't know.
Right.
Read it. Make sure I don't look stupid. So take an extra minute, have somebody else read it. Take an extra minute, have somebody else. Never proofread your own document, and never do the final testing. You always test your own software, but never do the final testing of your own software, because things you think are common sense are not. So have somebody else do it. So that was kind of what I said on the 80%. I also made one reference in there to a percentage with respect to culture. If you meet, let's say a company's got a small company, and you meet 10% of the workforce. They've got 50 employees. You talk to 5 people, and every one of them was a jerk. I guarantee you the CEO of that company is a jerk. So I used to always tell my employees, when you are out at a trade show, visiting clients, doing whatever, you represent the company, you represent me. Do not be a jerk. Don't be a jerk. I mean, I knew so many, and I've never seen it wrong. If I met a certain percentage, it doesn't have to be 90%, 80%, but if you met them at a trade show and they're out and just being obnoxious, there's a problem in that company. I remember watching Zenithus do that, and I'm like, oh, I guarantee you that company is a major problem just by how all their employees behaved.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my rule. They call me a prude. It's like, oh, Troy, you're just too straight and too. No, just be professional. Just be professional.
Yeah. That's really important, because I really do believe that business sometimes is won by inches and not necessarily miles. And just having a good attitude can alleviate so many problems for you. There have been many times where in our coffee shop, we didn't necessarily make a drink correctly or something like that. And you could tell that the person was ready to go off. But because our employee had a good mindset, a good attitude, and was willing to work with the customer to fix the problem, it turned a possibly big problem and a possible bad review into a good review of saying, oh, this happened, but here's how they fixed it. And I'm totally with you on that, because it's nothing worse than going to a place of business and they have a unique and cool brand, and they have the product, they have the service that you want, and then the person who's supposed to be delivering that product or service is just a jerk. Like, that's like the worst feeling ever. It's like, yeah, you were 90% through with the sale as soon as I walked up, and then you just messed up the last 10%. It's crazy. So I'm totally with you on that. And also I like, and I admire the humility to have other people proofread your emails and all your work, because I feel kind of funny when I do that too, and I do it like legitimately all the time, and then 90% of the time it's like fine, but there's that 10% where it's like I totally messed something up, and if I didn't have it proofread, it would have went out to everybody. And there have been times where that 10th time I was like, oh, it's been good. The rest of the time I'll just send it, and I look like a goofball.
Especially if you're angry, either overexcited, emotional, angry,
Yeah.
Then bite your tongue, don't hit send. It and save it somewhere. Don't send it.
Absolutely. So
I love all of these takeaways. So what's the process like for planning an exit in a company?
Exit, the important thing is, if you start an entrepreneurial endeavor, the entrepreneur needs to ask themselves, and they have to be honest with themselves, look in the mirror and talk to themselves and ask themselves, who are they? What is their affinity for risk? Can they go a month or 6 with this uncertainty or no money? How are they going to deal with that? How are they going to deal with having the buck stop here? They're the decision maker. They can't push it off onto anybody else. Don't blame anyone else. Take responsibility. You own the company. But they also need to think, and what am I going to do with it someday? That someday could be 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years. Some people want to just run it 20 years and then one day take down the shingle and go fishing or whatever it is. Really the exit I'm talking about, but it is an exit, because there will always be an exit. You will either die, you'll just close up shop, turn off the phone, turn off the lights and walk away, or you will hand it down to somebody, employees or your children or grandchildren. I mean, somebody is going to take over that someday. Or, and the strategy that I went with is, in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, I'm going to sell it. I was actually very honest with all of my key. I didn't, if you have 100 employees, I'm not going to talk to everyone and go sit down with the receptionist and say, hey, this is my strategy. I'm going to sell this company, but first I need the EBITDA to be, and she's going to go, huh?
What is an EBITDA?
Right.
Key employees, I always did that because I had an ESOP, an employee stock option plan. So I wanted the key employees to actually, hopefully significantly, benefit from an exit. Then they're on the same path as you. Their success is your success, your success is their success. So I said, I'm going to build the company up, and then we're going to position it for a sale. And then there's a lot of different types of sales. Are you going to go after venture capital? Are you going to go after a strategic investor? So maybe you'll position it differently and focus on, if you have a strategic investor, they are actually very interested in, not as much, although they are very interested in your EBITDA, so your earnings, as they are in your customer base, your technology. Do you have any IP or intellectual property? What is your culture? What are your employees like? And will they meld well with our company? Because they're going to put the two together. It's strategic. Yeah. The capital, professional money is a real challenge. And I'm not against professional money. You hear a but coming. But as an entrepreneur, you have to know, and there's different types of CEOs, an entrepreneurial CEO and a, as I call them, hired gun. Now, I'm not negative on the hired gun. You know, maybe they got their MBA, but usually they're not entrepreneurs. They have a very different mindset. They can manage. Oh, great, they've got managerial skills. Entrepreneurs, especially a necessity entrepreneur, may not have exceptional managerial skills. I managed by walking around. That's okay. So did Abraham Lincoln. That's how do you do it? I managed by walking around. So I didn't work as well in a remote environment. I wanted to be there. I wanted all my employees, hopefully, to be in the same building as me because I managed by walking around. And I walked around every day. And I'd just sit, and now it made a lot of people nervous. You know, why is Troy sitting here next to me? I'm just seeing what you're doing, how you doing, how's everything going, anything you need. So professional money may not like you as an entrepreneur. It's very common that you will sell your company. You might have a transition period. It could be months, it could be a year. And then you'll probably be gone, either because you choose to or because they choose for you to go. So I was actually fired by the venture capital from my company that I founded, which is a horrible experience. I mean, it's like, so be very careful. It's really hard because the venture capital people know what they're doing. They have one skill. They know how to make money. That's their only skill. They take these other companies, and I'm not saying they're disingenuous. I am just saying they are a lot more experienced at this than you. They've done this 50 times, 100 times. You've done it. Maybe this is your first. So they're always going to have a leg up on that. Even if you have attorneys, and you should review the agreements, you know, the sales agreements, and maybe there's an employment agreement, maybe there's an earnout agreement, et cetera, look in that. And you have to think, so the problem here is thinking, because entrepreneurs are typically optimistic. They see a pile of manure and they know there's a pony. They're just excited about things. And attorneys are not. Attorneys are looking for the worst in everything. It's kind of the job. And so you have to look at it as an attorney and say, let's pretend that these venture capital, they've been so nice, they took me out to dinner, yada, yada, yada. But you have to think of what if they're complete schmucks. I'm not saying they all are, but you have to ask yourself the what if question. What could go wrong? So what's guaranteed payment? What is payment on the earnout? What is payment on the employment contract? What is, you know, are all these things part of the deal? Because you'll very rarely just get one check and walk away, because there's always some sort of reps and warranties. Because if they come in, they're going to say, how do I know, even after doing due diligence, how do I know that everything that they represented is actually true? So there's going to be a period. It might be a very short one, could be 6 to 9 months. Typical, it's going to be, you know, 12 to 18 months. I've seen longer, but come out with some sort of a reps and warranties period. And if everything turns out, you know, there's no skeletons in the closet and there's a holdback, it could be 10%. So if you sell your company for, you know, $10 million in a year, you're going to get another $1 million if there's no claims against the reps and warranties. Mm-hmm. Assume worst case scenario. It's a little bit tough too if you're, as I was, honest, naive, optimistic, you know, everything was, hey, oh, that's great. Oh, so assume, just back yourself off for a second and be a pessimist for just a second and say, whoa, what could the worst case scenario be? And if it is the 90% good enough if they pay nothing on the earnout or the holdback? So that's kind of advice for that exit. And it's a way to go, but it's a new learning experience because it's a very different world. from especially a software technology entrepreneur. You know, I work with so many of them, just wonderfully brilliant people in Silicon Valley. And then you get the professional money, you know, the professional money, they know how to tie their tie correctly. You know, the software developer entrepreneur, not so much. You know, there might still be ketchup stains on their shirts because they're just a bunch of, and I say this affectionately, they're just a bunch of geeks out there just writing software.
Yeah.
And, you know, even when I was at IBM or a big team of software developers, there's so many people with such a different skill set that most of the people that were really good software developers could not run a business. You should know that just because you can bake a pie doesn't mean you can run a bakery. Selling pies, baking pies, running a business. Don't ever confuse the two. They're very different. And there's a lot of people that can run a business that can't do anything as far as the creativity side of it. You know, even look at the Wright brothers. You know, they made this thing called an airplane. Fantastic. Could they run an airline? Not a chance.
Awesome. So you've already given us so much information.
And we could definitely go on and on.
Yeah, but in order to start wrapping it up, we might have to have you on for a part 2 one day because you just know too much. But what is the number one takeaway you would like for somebody to get from actually both your book and also just this podcast episode?
You know, I was thinking about that yesterday. I was listening to the Bee Gees, How to Mend a Broken Heart. And, you know, you never count on the sorrow, count on it. So in other words, when a lot of optimistic entrepreneurs will go into this and they'll think, oh, look, I get to run my own show. I get to call all the shots. I'm going to hopefully exit someday with a significant amount of money. It'll be, everybody's going to respect me because I'm going to be the president. I'm going to walk around. It's not like that at all. Don't go into it with any naivete. You know, I've read a lot of books on it. I mean, I remember reading Richard Branson. So when he's talking about, I'm like, your mother is going to read this book. Because he was just very open and honest, and he admitted all the mistakes that he had made. I would just love to talk to somebody for an hour about every mistake I made so they don't do it. You know, look farther along you can get if you just know these are going to happen. But one of the biggest mistakes is the expectation of no sorrow, whether it's, you know, family. Do you hire family and friends? Okay, the answer is no. But you will have the expectation. And part of it too, and it's really tough, especially if you're really struggling and you're trying to, you know, salvage the last dollar, yada, yada, to sometimes bite your tongue. Just say nothing at certain, you always have to know yourself emotionally. And how are employees going to treat that? I have a few things going against me when I interview somebody. One, I have a title. Two, I know exactly what I'm doing. So there's no lack of confidence for what I'm doing. Three, I'm taller than they are. You have all these things going against or for you. And then four, I have the big corner office. So when a candidate walks in, they're immediately intimidated. Now, they really shouldn't be, or if they are, just a little bit. But man, if you get somebody in there and they're just so intimidated, they can't even talk in a complete sentence, it's probably not the right hire, especially if it's, you know, more of a senior person. I actually interviewed everybody I hired. I interviewed everybody. Now, it might have been the second or third interview, but I sat down and met with everybody. And in the book, I talk about a few questions that I would ask, and some of them were not well received. And it's like, and I go into a lot of detail on why I did this, but I'd asked to name 3 Nobel Prize winners. Now the question isn't a trivia question. It's not, do you know 3 Nobel Prize winners? It's, I'm going to tell you, I'll help you if you ask. And if they won't ask, and I had, because this was incredibly important for software developers. Software developers are brilliant. Some of these people are just crazy smart. Emphasis on crazy. And you can't necessarily predict. It's like, okay, you two had the same GPA, the same suit size, the same, I mean, you're the same everything, and one worked great and the other didn't. So I had to come up with one question that I could tell the candidate that would not work. And it isn't, do they know a trivia question? It's, will they ask for help?
Mm.
I had so many software developers say no. It's like the Sheldon Cooper Big Bang Theory. No, I won't ask for help. And I said, do you know the interview's over if you won't ask for help? Yeah. So it's very important.
Wow.
Literally, I've had those exact words with multiple candidates, mostly software developers, to get them out of there early before you make the mistake of hiring them. Because if they can't work as a team, especially in what we were doing, because it was so cutting edge, so brand new, there is no formula to follow. There's no path. We're trailblazers. We're cutting this path as we go. We all had to communicate, work in a team environment. So that's kind of a plan on a little bit of sorrow or a lot of sorrow. The upsides are great too, but know that there's two sides to this story.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I think you can always tell a seasoned entrepreneur when something actually goes right and they're so surprised. The other day we had a new location open and I was like, we're really open. Like, we're done? Like, wow, that's crazy. I couldn't believe it for like a whole week straight that we were already open. So definitely plan on that sorrow part. I've never heard anybody say that, but now that you've said it, I'm literally going to tell everybody that, because that is the God's honest truth. It's like, even when you know some of the pitfalls, it's almost as if there's certain ones that you're going to fall into anyway, just because of your emotional programming. But that's a really good piece of advice. Like, if you do write a book, it should probably be on all the mistakes.
Yeah, here's the mistakes. Down on them.
Here's all of the mistakes. You're still going to make a couple of them just because you're you. And just end it like that. So,
and that's part of it too, even with our software, and back to customer service, because I said, in an all company meeting many times, the most important people here in this are our customer service people, and the software developers are like, what? I said, the software will have errors. Just count on it. There will be something. But when that client calls up, they're going to get a customer service person that has to be exceptionally nice to them. So they're going to end that, because of a mistake, with a better view of the company. So I'd always hire. In fact, I always sent for customer service training, I always sent all of our employees to Disneyland, because I wanted to impress upon them that, this can be a little bit of fun. That's another advice. Have a little fun along the way. It doesn't always have to be 100% work. Right. Do not work, more than 40 hours a week, week after week after week after week. Yes, there are times when you have to crunch. I mean, no doubt about it. But if you do that and you're working, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, don't do it, especially with a family. Because I start the whole thing out with, this is family oriented. You have to take care of your health, yourself, mental, physical, and your family. Don't be like Charles Goodyear, where you're going to let your family all die from starvation while you're fascinated with vulcanized rubber. Make sure you take care of yourself, your family, and then your company.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So you're on the Abundant Culture podcast, and we have to ask every guest this question. And the question is, how do you spread abundance, whether it's in your business or your personal life?
Spread abundance. So I have a tendency to want to share. So even writing the book, I mean, I could have just, kept it all inside.
Yeah.
Writing a diary or something, I share it with my kids or something. So I share sometimes too much. I will reach out. I just said this. I have a few Airbnb, VRBO vacation rentals. So I just told someone, well, they're empty right now. So if there's a healthcare worker that needs a place to stay in San Diego or Reno, you can have my house. Just go stay in it for free. Don't worry, when you leave, I'll have someone come in and clean it. So being somewhat generous with your time, your money, your resources is kind of natural to me. I always wanted to teach. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, mentoring, helping them out with their ideas, telling them, where they're smart, where they're stupid, and what obstacles they're going to hit. Kind of like Marcus Lemonis, if you ever watch The Prophet.
I love it.
I love. Now, some people won't listen to you. So that's the trick. You have to find out, okay, I'm sharing this abundance. I'm helping you out. Matter of fact, the thing that I'm going to do today is yoga. So I hired a private yoga instructor, but I'm going to tell him, I want you to Zoom this to everybody. I'll pay for it. So you're teaching me, and however any other people want to log in, because you really can't go to yoga classes right now.
Yeah.
That way, you just spend an hour, and they're just going to watch you online and do it in their living room. So, that type of thing is really kind of, it really helps everybody involved.
Absolutely.
I mentioned before, when I retired, I wanted to find the number one problem in the nation or the world and solve it. I expected to go back and get my PhD in economics, because economists can solve anything, until I figured out, no, it's too easy. I can't write a doctoral thesis on this. It's too easy. So if you go to troyunderwood.com, you'll see a speech I gave last year, a presentation on holistic wellness, a sustainable model for financing healthcare. And we do it so wrong in this country that it's just mind-boggling how we can be so wrong, and we don't do anything to address the cause. What's the cause of all? We have trauma care, we can address the symptoms, but we don't address the cause of whether it's diabetes or obesity, cardiovascular disease. I know right now COVID-19 is huge, but we still to this day lose a lot more people every day from heart disease. Totally preventable.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And type 2 diabetes, totally preventable. So I've opened a true wellness retreat. I've never charged anybody, just come here and we're gonna learn how to eat a whole food plant-based diet. We're gonna do yoga, so all that kind of, don't stress, go for a hike, just relax, chill, socialize. Although we're really not socializing right now, but that's what I did to kind of spread the abundance. I've had people literally said they've never eaten a meal in their whole life that didn't have meat and dairy.
Wow.
And after they came to my wellness retreat, even a year later, they said, since then I haven't had a meal that did have meat or dairy. I've lost 21 pounds. I do 10,000 plus steps a day, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it can be life-changing.
Really?
And as an actuary, I'm just a wannabe actuary. Those are the people that have low healthcare costs. They have holistic wellness. So that's what I've done to spread abundance. Now, some people hate me for saying this. Like right now, my daughter is Miss Montana, and she is just hated by the cattle ranchers in Montana. And I grew up on a cattle ranch.
Really?
I mean, she's a vegan, doesn't eat meat or dairy. And now all the cattle ranchers in Montana wanted to recall her. How do you recall Miss Montana?
How do you do that?
I can't really recall it, but and so she'll have thousands and thousands and thousands. I mean, it's like, you're as popular as Miley Cyrus. You're a vegan in Montana. You know that you're gonna, if you talk about it, a lot of people are gonna say, oh no, that's, the people that like the paleo or the keto diets or whatever their diet is. And no, that only means you're gonna be the skinniest person in the cemetery. Don't be that person. Eat well. So, but then, because there's so much science and, oh no, what science says. So that's what I did. I went out and studied it even more and said, there's the answer right there. We would save $2 trillion, the total amount of this stimulus, $2 trillion a year if we ate right. So quit the subsidies to the animal agriculture. We also wouldn't have COVID-19 if we didn't eat animals. And I don't look at it, it's not ethical, it's not religious, it's not designed to save the environment, although it does. It's just for the financial gain of being well.
Oh, yeah.
Everything else falls into place. So that's what I've spent my time on the last year or two.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You actually do sound a little bit like an economist.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my degree is economics. I was computer science, mathematics, doing my pre-med work. So I did all the science. I mean, I was 5 units away from a bachelor's in chemistry, and then I accidentally, on a dare, took an econ course. And so at UC Davis is a science school, and I don't mean social science. So I made a disparaging comment about the social sciences. And somebody said, you don't know anything about social sciences. All you've been is pre-med. I'm like, econ's so easy. Anybody, half a brain can get an econ course, which is not totally true, by the way. smartest guy I ever met in college could not pass an econ course.
Wow.
100% in physiology. And I'm like, well, that's just fascinating. So I did really well in economics and really struggled in physiology, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So the difference is that it really takes an entire team to come together and make a business or a society. I just think it's really brilliant. So yeah, I did finish in econ.
Wow, that's amazing. Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on to the Abundant Culture Podcast. We truly appreciate all the information you've given us. You've given us a wealth of information about entrepreneurship. We also got a little bit about health, which is always really cool when we go off on those tangents that are unplanned, because we feel like that also adds value to our listeners and to our viewers. And we truly, truly appreciate you. But before we let you go, you're an awesome guy. Somebody probably wants to either do yoga with you, or maybe they want to interview you, or maybe they want to be mentored by you. For whatever reason, how does that person get into contact with either you or your team?
Well, if you go to troyrunderwood.com, there is a contact me page on there. You can go to troy@truebenefits.net, and that'll reach me. So, and the phone number is on the troyrunderwood.com. And yeah, I'd be glad to, matter of fact, I'll probably try to set up something, especially right now when people aren't going out and socializing, where if anybody has questions on it, I'd be glad to, review their business plan, tell them what I like, and more importantly, tell them what I don't like.
Awesome. We really appreciate that.
So thank you so much for coming onto this podcast again. This was awesome.
Thank you.
So that's all we have for today, folks. I hope you got as much value out of this as we did. Keep in mind, the only way we can improve is through constructive feedback. So remember to rate and review this episode. Also, you are not the only person that needs to know this super valuable information. So be sure to subscribe and share as well. Stay tuned for the next episode. And remember to always spread abundance. Peace.